Hello, my name is Maria Trejo. I'm the Dean of Students at Homestead High School. Today's advisory is going to focus on the Latinx experience. Every month, we'll be looking at a different group that makes up our diverse campus community. And I know that some other school sites might be looking at our video. So I hope that you enjoy it. By no means am I a director and editor, but I definitely want to share what it is to be a Spanish speaker, what it is to grow up Latinx, what it means to be a part of the Central American culture for some of the people that you will see in the video. I hope that you can find some similarities so that we can create a safer and more welcoming campus for our Latinx students. I also want our Latinx students to see the success that is out there in our community and hopefully break any myths and misconceptions that exist about our culture.
My name is Clara Benitez. I am an anchor reporter. So I'm a journalist at a local news station in South Texas, along the border here of Mexico and Texas. I am Mexican and Honduran. My mom is from Mexico, my dad is from Honduras, and I would consider myself a first generation, and I go by she, her. Those are my pronouns. So I began identifying myself as Latina or Latinx, I think in college. I'm from San Diego, California, and there I feel like it was a very diverse location area where we didn't really speak about whether you identified yourself as Hispanic or as Latina or Mexican or Honduran. It was more, I think a lot of people essentially just grouped you as you're Mexican. But in reality, yes, I was Mexican, but I was also Honduran. So I think in college is when we started to really realize how diverse the Latino community is. And I started going with I'm Mexican Honduran or I'm Honduran Central American. So I think that was in college is when I started to identify myself as Latina. People do use Hispanic, but I rarely like to call myself Hispanic. It's majority Latina because both of my parents are from Latin America. My mom is from Mexico, my dad is from Honduras. And so when somebody says, what are you, Hispanic, Latino, or American, I would say I'm Latina.
So, my name is Ricardo Salgado. I am an educator, currently a dean at an Eastside Union High School District. Groups I identify with are Latino, Hispanic, races, Native American. That's pretty much it. Middle school. I grew up in a very diverse area, but kids, teens, and everything, if you spoke Spanish, everyone considered you Mexican, kind of like thing. So, at a young age, I had to identify and kind of like tell them like no, not just Mexicans speak Spanish, there are many other countries that speak Spanish. And so I always identify myself as Salvadoran American. And then growing up, we had kind of like cultural diversity, and I would always wear kind of like shirts or something that stated El Salvador, something like that, to bring that to people's attention, because not many people know about the smallest country in Latin America, and so forth. So bringing that out to the crowd and everything.
Great. My name is Evelyn Molina. I was recently laid off from a job in sales and account management from Expedia Group. Many people know Expedia.com, hotels.com, etc. And I've had a career in account management, specifically in the hospitality industry for the last 15 years, which ages me. But I also have a wedding and event photography business. So in this interim, I am continuing to shoot as much as possible and move my business forward as I determine next steps I am first generation Nicaragüense. Both my parents are from Nicaragua, came here in 79, and I consider myself Nicaragüense, Latina, and go by the pronouns of she and her. So I was raised by two parents, a grandfather, and I have a younger sister, and the majority of my family, specifically on my dad's side, is in the Bay Area, and everyone's Nicaragüense. So all my cousins are first gen. And so I grew up very, very in a very close-knit family environment, not just my immediate family, but all my cousins, all of my tios, my tias, etc. So I never knew maybe growing up how different or not different we were going to be, but I always knew that we had very Nicaraguan traditions. One, Spanish was my first language. And then as soon as I went to school, that was preschool, that's when English came in. Having Spanish be my first language definitely played out, has played out, in my future, which I can touch on later. But I think a lot of my values come from growing up either Latina, Nicaragüense. I interchange those two terms, where a lot of my values or my core values, I would say, are family, community, culture, even, exploration. Having a dual language has helped me connect with other Spanish speaking, Latinx members. But I would say that having grown up first in a diverse community and knowing that the world was different set up the stage for when I entered high school and went to a predominantly white and Asian school. And that's where I really knew that I was different.
My name's Alejandro Ruiz. I am a deputy probation officer, 3, top step. So, when they ask me what I am, I say I'm Mexican. Well, I was raised in LA, so it's very Mexican in LA, and growing up in an area where it was mostly Mexican and Central American, it was, ever since I was a little kid, I didn't think I was anything else. It was everybody around me was brown. The majority of them were Mexican, so it's pretty. I never thought it was anything else.
Hispanic, it was before when we were filling out applications to go to college, but it was just because that was there. But identifying myself as a Latino, I started that in college because that's where I gained awareness and became more curious as to my own culture and just the background and learning about the histories. Like it was then where I was able to see myself in the literature that I read. So it started in UC Santa Cruz because I was majoring in Spanish literature, and so I started reading about Rigoberta Menchú, reading Limón, Graciela Limón, and I think that was In Search of Bernabé. That's the particular book that addressed the Salvadorian Civil War and what was going on. So then I started learning. That's what triggered just the curiosity, and just now I lived through it. So now I know it's like, and so then I started taking more pride in identifying myself as Latina Salvadoreña, because I saw how I was just learning that, like, kind of my eyes were opened at UC Santa Cruz through that book.
Morning. My name is Mariela Garcia Buch. I am a first-generation Mexican-American. My parents came from Michoacán, Mexico. I began to identify as a Chicana when I learned about the Chicano movement of the 1960s in college. I use the term Chicana because it embraces my Mexican culture, my heritage, and it also recognizes that I was born here in America. I was raised in a traditional Mexican family with 2 parents. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. I am the oldest daughter. and with that comes a lot of responsibility. I am the first in my family to go to college, and my parents instilled in me the importance of hard work and education. I went to a predominantly white high school, and I never really seemed to fit in. I actually graduated a semester early, and when I went to college, I began taking Chicano studies classes, and that is actually where I felt at home.
So my upbringing, so both my parents are immigrants. They immigrated here in the 80s. My dad ended up getting citizenship under Ronald Reagan, ended up helping my mom get citizenship. She was undocumented. And they had me, my brother, and my sister. And so we were working class, not poor, not rich. It was a very good upbringing. My mom worked really hard, and so did my dad. And always pushed us to go to school and to finish high school. The only thing that I think was a little bit different with my parents was that because they were immigrants, they didn't really know essentially college and what's after high school, right? Because my parents didn't even finish, I would say, like elementary school, maybe even middle school. So for me to go to a university was maybe more by myself. But I did it because I wanted to have a better life. Not that I didn't have a good life, but I wanted to have a better life than what my parents had, and make sure that they didn't have too many struggles and I can help them out and etc. So but yeah, my upbringing was really, we spoke Spanish at the house. I was in bilingual classes when I was in elementary school, and I think that really helped me because I know both Espanol y Inglés. So, and now as a journalist, it's great because I'm on the border and I can talk to people in Spanish and English, translate that to people that don't understand. So I think that's really important. And a lot of them, my friends, I think their parents didn't want to teach them English. So it just depended on how, but that's essentially was my upbringing was, I had a family of 5, and went to high school, did a lot of sports. I did a lot of extracurricular activities. Was really talkative in school, and then I went to Arizona State, so I moved away from home, which I think was a big shock to the Latino community because usually, you stay with your parents, you stay close to home, you don't want to leave them. But my parents were very supportive, and that I wanted to do a journalism degree, and so I ended up leaving and ended up choosing a great career. I was only 6 hours away from home, so that wasn't that bad. And then I've been moving around quite a bit. This is my 4th state that I've lived in, Texas, and hopefully I'm going back to California soon.
It was growing up in the area where I grew up was hard. We had a police department in the area, Rampart Division. So if anybody knows anything about police brutality or corruption, all they got to do is Google Rampart Division, in the 80s and 90s, and you're gonna see stories of brutality and kind of growing up in the area. They were the ones that patrolled my area, and it was you see it everywhere. And when you live in an area with a lot of issues, drugs, gangs, and everything else, and I look like everybody else, you just kind of I don't want to say you get profiled, but you get the same treatment as the people that are out there doing the bad thing. And I think just kind of growing up like that made me want to be something like that, to make a difference, to not have somebody, to maybe show an example that you don't have to treat people like that. And just kind of like doing it for a long time already, I know that I feel like I've made a small difference, at least in my community.
My parents moved from Pittsburgh to the Concord Walnut Creek area, and I kind of put those together because my parents had a Concord address, but specifically moved my sister and me there so that we could attend school in Walnut Creek. Very specifically, Northgate High School. That's where I went. It's a very what I would consider affluent area, or upper middle class, lower upper class. This was my first time having classmates whose parents were doctors, lawyers. I thought this was something that you'd only see on TV. And so all of a sudden I see my classmates, one, never having had a friend that spoke Spanish, or never having had a friend or a classmate that was Latina, nonetheless, definitely not Central American. And so this is the first time in my life where I had to start explaining things to people. So the question was always where are you from? And so I had my little script, and I would say, oh, I'm Nicaraguan. I pause because back then no one knew where Nicaragua was. I pause because they'd have this puzzled face on them. And I'd be like, that's in Central America. We are the largest country in this area. We're the second poorest in the Western Hemisphere. I had all these fun facts to spew at people. And I never had to have this type of explanation prior to getting to high school. And so no one else around me had to do that. The white kids didn't have to do that. The Asian kids didn't have to do that. It was something that I was carrying on my own, and I became a one sole educator to everyone around me in high school.
And I went through public school for most of my life, K through 8. Being the eldest in my family, my parents didn't want to send me to the high school that I was supposed to go to here on the east side. So I went to a private high school on the west side of town. And I definitely saw culture shock. Number one, going from public to private, but number two, seeing the lack of diversity. My high school was only 12% Latino. So I was one of the few attending that school. So that definitely put me in the minority. And you could totally see that there. And it really played on my mental state of health, because I had to always prove myself. And I guess prove myself a little bit harder than I would had I stayed at a high school by my home on the east side of San Jose. So definitely, I think that my high school years kind of formed my work ethic, and that I always had to prove and work hard to get to where I'm at. So that definitely was an Achilles heel, because I had all that on me as a public school kid, number one, and number two, being Latino at a school where the majority was Caucasian.
In high school, I went to a high school that was, I want to say about 80% of us were Latinos. So there wasn't that much diversity. But what I do recall is I think our counselors we didn't really interact with our counselors. It was mainly through our friends. Well, luckily, we surrounded ourselves, my brother and I say we because it's always been the two of us, with friends who wanted to pursue a higher education, who wanted to do well in school. So we had that support system, not necessarily by the counselors, but by just classmates and some teachers here and there. In high school, we were still undocumented. So knowing that our friends were going to college, for us, it was an uncertain. It just was not certain. It was an uncertainty. By all means, we applied, and we didn't know how we were going to pay for it. My mom wasn't asking us those questions because she herself didn't have the background to be able to ask those questions. And so we depended a lot on each other, my brother and I, and our friends as well. I remember staying up one night, just filling out the financial aid application, but we had no clue what we were going to qualify for, because we had a work permit at that time, but we weren't legal residents. So luckily, my brother received a scholarship, so he went out of state, and I got loans and work study. But so as a Latina, I didn't feel like stood out just because I was surrounded by Latinos primarily. But what made me feel different is the fact that I wasn't documented. And that was something that none of our friends knew. It was a secret that we kept because I felt to a certain extent ashamed or embarrassed because I felt people were going to look down upon me because I was not documented.
I can say that other than when I was younger, and going to the store with my mom when we were shopping, we often found ourselves being followed by the store clerks, making sure that we wouldn't steal anything. But other than that, I am fortunate to say that I didn't really experience any visual discrimination. One of the things I remember is that one of my professors mentioned to me that he actually shared with the class that education is what levels the playing field for the opportunities that are provided to you. And that really stuck to me.
So it was more like people would just generalize me in the Mexican category, which I wouldn't mind because, again, I am half Mexican, but I'm also Honduran. So it was more categorizing like the Mexicans. And I think now, hopefully in high school, people can understand that there is so many Latin American countries that people are from that have so many different cultures, and it's multicultural and it's diverse and it's very different than just being Mexican. And I think I tried to help people understand, in Honduras, you don't say a certain word, a chumpa is a sweatshirt, es un suéter. So, things like that is a little bit different. The food is different, right? Mexicans love spicy food, right? But in Central America, you don't really do a lot of spicy food. You maybe do ketchup, and you do plantains, which is, one of my favorites, yuca. So very, very different. So in high school, they categorized me as Mexican, but I think it was my responsibility to let people know I'm not just Mexican, I'm also Honduran, and I have a different culture to me, which is amazing in the Latino community, I feel like.
Coming from growing up in LA, growing up in the downtown area, where it was mostly brown, then right after high school, moving to San Jose and living downtown, where there was a very diverse. I never felt discriminated against when it came to kind of like my community. So as far as growing up in the areas, I never really felt the discrimination. It wasn't until college, it wasn't until like on campus, and it wasn't until the workforce where I started to see some of it. Being the only brown, black faces in a certain wing or a certain floor, and then something starts to happen, things get stolen, people are being loud, and the first people they go to was my room, and my neighbor's room, because we were like the ones that were a little louder, but it wasn't really us causing the trouble. They would just kind of like assume. Seeing it when I met in college, I also met when I traveling to like other colleges. And one, for example, traveling to the University of Nevada, Reno, and supporting our football team and driving and visiting over the campus over there. It was the first time that I actually felt being discriminated against, like to my face, and very openly racist comments to my face ever, for the first time ever. And in the workplace, you when you work in an area where at the time, like the top 5% is non-minority, and you kind of like feel like you have you have what it takes to promote, you have what it takes to move on, but yet you feel that at the time, not anymore. Not in my field. I don't think I see it as much, but in other jobs that I've had in the past, I felt it. I felt that they didn't want somebody like me in those positions to be making a difference or making decisions.
Definitely this I remember very specifically a pre-calc class sitting in the back next to this guy who I really thought was my friend, and I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know the context of it, but he called me a spick. At that moment, it didn't even hurt my feelings, because at that moment I was like, you are so dumb. You don't know me, and are you just throwing this at me to like get a reaction? But I think very specifically in high school, the one that I think sticks out even in my mind even more is when I got into every UC that I applied to, including Cal, including UCLA, and a lot of my classmates didn't. And the assumption was that I had gotten in because of affirmative action, because I checked off a box that said, I'm Latina, and that sucked. I mean, for someone to question my intelligence, whether I'm prepared or not, whether I got in based on my academics and everything that I brought to the table versus getting in for some other reason. And very specifically, older white teacher who taught, honors English. Her and I butt heads. She never liked me for whatever reason. But she's the one it was actually a teacher who doubted my acceptance, and that trickled down into students. And I don't know if the word is like hurtful or I was upset, but it definitely wasn't positive feelings that I was feeling when a lot of this doubt was instilled in me. But I went to Cal super proud and didn't look back.
One experience that stands out to me is when I was looking for a home. I was, and I noticed that the realtor was Asian, I'm not sure what country. Other prospective buyers were also Asian, and I was the only Latina walking into that open house. I walked in, went to the different rooms to look at the different areas of the parts of the house, but I was not acknowledged. I felt like I was not wanted as a potential buyer there, and nothing was said even after walking out. So I wasn't acknowledged. My presence there was not acknowledged. So that I would say it's the only time.
High school, I can remember one instance that I was taking a foreign language. I've never formally learned Spanish. I just grew up at home reading, speaking it, and so forth. And so I actually took Spanish classes in high school. And because of my schedule, I wasn't allowed to go into the class I was supposed to. So I remember I was taking Spanish too. And I had the hardest time with mandatos, mandates, and so I didn't know the difference. And I remember one student like called me out in front of class, and just said, why is he in this class? He knows Spanish. He looks Latino. It doesn't make any sense. He's definitely wrecking the curve. And I just bit my tongue because I was like, where is this coming from? Mind you, she was also another athlete like myself. And I will never forget the teacher. She kind of stood up for me in that regard and basically said, okay, excuse me, let's go back. Just because he looks Latino, speaks the language, doesn't mean that he's fluent in the language. But she kind of turned it around on her and said, what is your mother tongue? And then the student said, English. And then the teacher, being the teacher, was like, then why are you taking English? Aren't you fluent in English? So I kind of like, whoa, okay. That was like the first thing, because I mean, I was a freshman. Again, like I said, going from public to private. So that was a shocker to myself. But here you had, and I mean, the person was Anglo-Saxon white, who, felt the liberty to say this in front of everybody, but she was outing me in front of the entire class, So that was a learning experience for me. But yeah, just because I was Latino, like I said, some teachers, not all, definitely looked at you differently or questioned what you turned in. So I kind of rubbed it off my shoulder. And I think that's kind of a saying that I say, that I tell my students when I was in the classroom: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It's all about resiliency. So even though I was put in that position, it's always how you come up out of the ashes when something like that happens.
I think it was mainly in high school. You know, there was a teacher of mine who she was the deciding factor of whether I was going to go to algebra 2 or I was going to skip math and then just go to an easy math class, because you needed algebra 2 to go to a university. You didn't need you didn't need this easy math class to go to a community college. And so she essentially told everybody, all the Latinos in my class, like, oh, it's going to be too hard. Like, you don't even have to try it. Don't worry. You're not going to go to a 4-year university. You should just, skip the algebra 2 and just go to the easier math class. And so she was essentially telling all of the Latinos to skip algebra 2. And I remember telling her, well, I don't want to skip algebra 2. I want to have the option of going to a 4-year university. And she was a little taken back, and really tried to convince me not to do it. And I was really upset. And I said, no, I want algebra 2. So she signed me up for algebra 2. Yes, it was very difficult because I'm not a math person. Obviously, I'm in journalism. But I would say that would be, like, I think, discrimination as a whole, as grouping Latinos aside, that we're not smart enough, that our parents are immigrants, that we don't know a lot of English well enough as our white counterparts, which isn't true. And a lot of people that did end up taking the easy route went to a 2-year and essentially got stuck there and don't have their degrees yet, or it took them a really long time, which isn't a bad thing. But I think if she would have really pushed people to do better, she was Asian, by the way. I think a lot of people would have actually pushed and maybe done better in their academics. I would say also, when I went to school, to ASU, it was very different because it's predominantly white in Arizona. It's a predominantly white university. And so me as a Latina, I think I really wasn't taken seriously. But thankfully, I was able to hang out with people who took me seriously, and was able to hang around with people that are multicultural, and it really helped me push everybody essentially to do a really great job. But I think that would be the only one. I am a lighter skinned Latina, so I don't think that I have experienced racism as bad as people that are darker skinned, and that is just a fact within the Latino community. If you are lighter skinned, you probably aren't going to have any racist remarks towards you. But if you're darker skinned, which my dad is, because my dad is Hondureño, they're very dark skinned, he has definitely experienced racism.
Whenever you see any kind of movie, whenever you see any kind of a show, and you see the brown person, you see the black person, we're always in roles of the thug, or the negative aspect of whatever title, movie, or show it is. And unfortunately, that's kind of like the norm.
I think two-part. So one is, I think the obvious is that not everyone who identifies as Latinx is Mexican. I think that's a very California thing. And I don't necessarily blame people for thinking that, because the majority of Spanish speakers in the state of California are from Mexican descent. But part two of that is that Nicaragua exists. I feel like my entire life I've had to explain, one, we're a country that does exist. Two, this is what we're known for. And three, actually, yeah, I am gonna add a third. In the last 8 to 10 years, tourism has grown in Nicaragua. And so I think that there's all the name, or the country is now being recognized by a lot of people who are traveling, tourism, etc. But I think something that I want to convey to people is that the luxury hotels that you see or you're going to in Nicaragua doesn't always represent the whole country.
One is that we're violent. Salvadoreños are violent. people. And here in the United States, I think that is probably because of MS-13, the gangs that is definitely prominent in the south of California and actually the Southwest in general. And I think part of that also kind of leads to the fact that we're kind of ignorant and dumb. A nickname that Salvadoreños are given are guanacos. And guanacos actually, when you translate into the English language, is the dodo bird. And we all know what a dodo bird is, or the connotations with that. So those are two misconceptions that I hear all the time about our culture being Salvadoreño.
One misconception about my culture, I would say, is that Mexicans are lazy. I feel that I have never seen a harder group of working people, waking up early, working in the fields, or all of the hard labor jobs that most people don't want or won't take. We see Mexicans working, especially right now with all the fires, and they're out there early in the smoke picking our vegetables. So I think that's one misconception that people have about my culture.
I think right now is the fact that we're all gang members in the cartel. La Mala Salvatrucha, right? Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras is known as that triangle where they traffic drugs, where people, the caravan, people have left to come here to the country, and they think that they are criminals, and they're part of the gang. So I think that is one misconception. But in reality, Honduran culture is beautiful, and I mean, just really great culture. And when people think about, I think, Hondurans, they think about immigrants coming to the country and think about crime and gangs. But in reality, that is not true. As you can see, a lot of people are successful, and I love the culture that Honduras offers.
I can't imagine anything else than just saying that, like, I grew up in, I would say, one of the funnest, it's the only thing I know, right? But one of the liveliest, loudest, unified, loving, passionate, types of cultures. And I think that has, I think honestly that's helped me stand out in good ways and bad ways. But even in my career, and even as a small business owner, I used to think, that people calling me passionate was because I was Latina, and I was like, I'm not passionate, because I'm Latina. Like, I'm passionate because it is who I am. But I think, maybe there's just like a love and passion that does come from being Nicaraguense, Latina, Latinx, all the above, that has shown through, both as a photographer, as a business owner, as, someone that's climbed the ranks, within corporate America, in the travel industry, and that shows. I think we just do things with heart, and that drives me today.
You grew up and your parents forced you to do all the little whatever traditions they grew up doing. I mean, I'm talking about even speaking Spanish. I have two daughters. One's a senior in high school. The other one's in 8th grade. They hated me and their mom because we made them go through dual immersion. So they're learning Spanish and English at the same time since K through 8th. And they fought us every day. They hated the whole Spanish thing. They hated that they had to work double, triple as hard than the normal student because they had to learn it in 2 languages. But my daughter, who's a senior now, is so appreciative of knowing Spanish, and now understands the importance of having a second language. So at the same time, making them listen to certain songs that I grew up listening to, they hated it. And now I check my daughter's phone and she's listening to music that that I was listening to when I was a teenager, and knows this, not just listening to it, but like singing to it. And that just, to me, it shows me that they have a little bit of culture, at least that from the outside, because in the inside, you know that they understand that they're Mexican. They understand that their parents are Mexican, their grandparents are Mexican. They understand that they almost take pride into that. And even though they were both born here in the U.S., they it's I'm not saying that I take any satisfaction by not claiming the American culture, because they do, but it's nice when they actually claim that they're Mexican, because I didn't think that they were gonna have pride, and it gives me joy.
I think it's important because if I didn't know and someone were to say something about Hondurans or Honduras in itself, I could essentially defend myself. I think that's the biggest thing is about knowing your culture, is saying, wait, what you're saying is a misconception. It's very wrong, and this is actually the reality that's happening in the country, or this is what we bring to the table as Hondureños, also known as catrachos, catrachas. And I think that is the biggest thing is knowing your roots, being happy that you are in a place like America that you can know other people that are Panamanian or Nicaraguense or Salvadoranian, or Mexican. I knew a few people that were from Peru and Bolivia. I mean, that is a completely different type of cultural background as well. So I think it's really important to know that, because you know how diverse you are and you enjoy it. You enjoy being in that sense.
About knowing your cultural background and traditional customs is basically they identify you. They make you who you are. I mean, we're all humans and everything, but because of what we know, what we bring, and what we do, I think that makes us unique. And I definitely saw that, me personally, when I changed from teaching math to Spanish, and learning about culture and expressing that more and finding out more about myself and my students. And I really do think that those two things basically create your identity, not just because your name and who you are, but create your uniqueness as an individual, and then the rapport and the relations that you bring and you have in your life. So I really think that for me, it kind of grounds you as to who you are.